There we go. All right, I will let you call this meeting to order at 4:03 p.m. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our February meeting after our quite abbreviated January meeting. It's great to start 2022. This year, following a decision on February the 8th, we will now be beginning our meetings with a land acknowledgement, so that the Halifax Regional Municipality is located on McMahon, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaties signed in this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. So here we are with the roll call. First of all, Liz, can you see your translator? Interpreters.
I can, thank you.
Great. Nicole, are you here?
I'm here.
Excellent. Jackie, are you here?
I'm here.
Excellent. Rochelle, is Rochelle here?
I'm here.
Excellent. Councillor Russell.
Hello from City Hall today.
Excellent. Good to see you. Councillor Gammon.
Happy to be here, Mr. Chair, from Fall River.
Thank you very much. Asia. So is that silence telling me that she is not here?
Hi, Chair. Yes, they're not in the meeting.
Okay. Samantha.
And Chair Samantha is also not in the meeting today.
Thank you. Leslie, we have received regrets from, so that takes care of that. Approval of the minutes from the December meeting. They were circulated as part of the agenda package, so I hope we've at least glanced at them to know where we should go today. So I will need a mover for the minutes, please.
I'll move.
I move. This is Elizabeth.
Okay, I'll take Elizabeth as the mover.
And I'll second.
Okay, can you identify? Because I'm looking at my minutes.
Jackie.
Thank you, Jackie. So moved by Elizabeth, seconded by Jackie. All in favor, say aye.
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 Great.
Aye.
Any opposed? Good. Motion carried. I'm hit. Approval of the order of business and additions and deletions. Have we any additions, deletions, or changes?
Thank you, Chair. The clerk's office did not receive any requests for additions or deletions for today's agenda.
Excellent. So I need a mover for that and a seconder.
This is Rochelle. I'll move.
Thank you. Seconder, please.
I'll second that. Kathy?
Great. Thank you, Jackie. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Business arising over the minutes. I see none. Excellent. Declarations of conflict of interest. I hear none. Consideration of deferred business. Annie, would you be willing to tell us about the overview discussion from the annual town hall?
Absolutely. So thank you, Chair. It's been a little while since we've chatted about the town hall, because it's been a little bit since we've all been together. So really happy that that folks are here today. So we have two different items around the town hall today, and the first piece for this agenda item is a memo that kind of just speaks to the planning behind the town hall and some of the kind of key numbers that came from the hard work that everybody put into it. So yeah, so I'll maybe just provide like a quick overview, and then I'm happy to take any questions after the fact. But the memo was circulated with this agenda package as well as the previous agenda package, and I'll just point to a few different kind of key numbers. So throughout the town hall, there was, we took some questions from the floor in Paula Regan Hall, as well as questions virtually, and there was over 50 participants in Zoom for the duration of the event, around 20 plus participants in Paula Regan Hall itself, and more than 35 questions submitted by members of the public. So in comparison to previous town halls, this is definitely a really high engagement level, and a lot of questions were asked from different folks in the community. The support for the town hall, in addition to the 8 business unit representatives who partook in the panel, there was also 12 HRM staff from 3 different business units in the municipal clerk's office, in diversity and inclusion office, and as well as communications in corporate communications. So behind the scenes and in between meetings, there was a lot of kind of staff meetings taking place to make sure that the event was well supported. And yeah, so then I further kind of just outlined what the planning process looked like. And while this is, for absolutely to make sure that the committee is aware of, the work that went on throughout the process, this is also just an effort to make sure that we have this documented and have timelines documented, as that wasn't necessarily the amount of information that Melissa and I had to work with on the front end. So just wanted to make sure that everybody kind of had that information to work with, and that we have that documentation to refer to for planning the town halls of the future for the Accessibility Advisory Committee. So with that, I mean, I'm happy to take any questions on this kind of memo particularly, and then maybe we'll separate kind of the contents of the staff report that will be going to Executive Standing Committee. We can chat about that next, but happy to take any questions on the context of the memo that you have.
Trying to
If
do
I-
too much. Let's start the questioning with Liz. Do you have any questions for Annie?
So do you mean just related to the town hall?
Related to the overview at the moment.
Yeah, I just wanted to actually add some feedback. So would that be something I would do now? 'Cause I'm
Certainly,
trying to add a little bit of feedback that I wanted to.
Yeah.
So the feedback is that I found that the interpreters needed to be a little bit sort of more close in, so more like from top of their head to their waist, not like their full bodies or a large percentage of their bodies. Because some of us use a lot of lip reading and facial grammar, those sorts of things, and they're harder to see when the view is so wide. So I would suggest next time when you are putting the interpreters on screen, they should be like the interpreters here today. They should be between sort of just the top of their heads and their waists. And then that way we're able to see, like I say, the facial grammar has a lot to do with the language. It's not just their hands that are important to see. So that would just be my only little bit of feedback.
Great, thank you. That's definitely something I've seen and something we will continue in the future, I hope. Nicole, do you have any questions?
No questions. Thank you.
Jackie, do you have any questions?
No, for a change, I'm fine. Thank you, Annie.
Okay, Rochelle, do you have any?
No questions today. Thank you.
Councillor Russell?
Thank you. I have questions of two natures. The first one is a question for everybody who is here. And that is, I generally, when I go through something like this, look to see what was missing, what could be done to make it better. This is, I'm not sure if it was, I just want to make sure that it was absolutely expressed and understood that this is just an error to make sure that nothing is missed in future town halls. So not asking Annie specifically to do something or for further information, but just saying this is something that might have been, or that might be able to be done to make the whole thing better. So I'm just going to leave that with the rest of the committee. What I did notice here, one of the things that we look at, one of the things that we consider is those things that are most familiar to us a lot. And that's one of the reasons I really like this committee, because we as fully abled people, or some of us anyway, get to interact and make sure that it is top of mind, those who need other types of supports. Generally, what we see is mobility issues. We also have Liz, who is bringing a hearing issue, and there are also sight issues. And I didn't see anything in relation to someone with sight challenges. I didn't see anything in Braille or anything like that at the town hall. And I just want to make sure that we don't lose, forgive the expression, lose sight of the fact that this is for, that this could include somebody with that type of disability or with some other types of disabilities. And I want to make sure that they're all covered.
Good point.
Thank you.
Thank you. If I may, Chair, through you to the councillor, thank you very much for that. And we, in conversations with the accessibility advisor previously and in what had been done in former town halls, Braille was used on some of the agendas, but I think what was determined was that I believe that there are two different, and I'm also recognizing that I'm speaking out of my element here. So, and if anybody please feel free to correct me if this information is incorrect. But my understanding is that there are potentially two versions of Braille that are commonly used that may not necessarily contradict like one another, but just trying to find the best option was a concern that was kind of brought forward early on. And in previous iterations of the town hall, I believe only about 10 agendas were printed in Braille. So, you know, absolutely something that can be revisited and discussed for further iterations of the town hall. And I'm not sure if the accessibility advisor has anything to say on that piece, recognizing that Melissa is also having a few technical difficulties today, like seemingly all of us are at the municipality. So yeah, I'm like, at the end of the day, point absolutely like taken here, and will certainly be a consideration that is put forward for future planning.
Great, thank you for that.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
Jackie, through you, please. Just to follow up on Councillor Russell's point, I agree wholeheartedly, and I think The other areas, we have to think of it as cross disabilities, and we don't often, because sometimes things are so visual for us. But plain language is very important as well. And not just for individuals with an intellectual disability. There's all kinds of folks. And I mean, folks with mental health issues as well. We need to be aware of all of those disabilities in whatever type of communication or whatever we do. Thank you.
Yes, you're right on. I, being mobility, I have this is what I know. So expanding that is a challenge for me as well. Anything else regarding the overview? We have next on our list, Councillor Gammon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one of the observations, I guess, and a comment to share about the town hall was that I felt some of the business units were less prepared than others. So I might have been a little bit disappointed in the quality of some of the answers that were given to the audience who had, pretty legitimate questions. And I thought that the preparation for the town hall was really well done on the side of making sure that the audience was going to be there and they were prepared. And I mean, face it, remember the rain that evening? It was horrendous. And we still got people out, which is really nice. But I think maybe in future, the prep for who from the business unit is going to come to the town hall, what kind of expertise will they bring? What kind of answers can they bring? And then maybe even that we could have some takeaways at the business units. We'll work with their comms department or something, and that they have some takeaways for people. Like there were really good questions around some of the things, some of the issues and concerns people had around accessibility. So it would have been nice if we had something there that we could give people as they leave that was particular about some of the business units and how they are meeting the mandate for an accessible HRM. So yeah, so I guess just on for the next town hall, prepping the business units in the best way possible so that we get the right person with the right energy to be able to come and to speak. As Jackie has said so nicely, I'm always talking about plain language and I want somebody to answer a question in plain language. So that's just an observation that next year, if there's anything that even I, as a member of this committee, can do to work with business units to make sure that we get the right kind of people, the right kind of information in the room. That's my 2 cents, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. Annie, can you make sure that is reflected?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chair, and through you to the councillor. I will note that there was follow-up done with the individuals whose questions could not be answered during the town hall itself. So myself and the accessibility advisor followed up directly with staff to ensure that they were connected with some of the folks who ask questions that couldn't be answered, but certainly take your point around having the representatives on the panel prepped as well, and there were their speeches or presentations were made available in the physical locations as well as online. Yep. Yes, take your point across the board here. So thank you.
Yeah, and some of them did a great job, but I don't mean it wasn't all bad or anything like that. I just think that we can, as Councillor Russell said, just what can we do better for next time? Thanks.
Great. Okay, annual town hall report. That's you again, Annie, so you have the floor. Virtually.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you, Chair. So I'll just maybe briefly speak to the report. But this report is intended to be provided to the Executive Standing Committee for their review, so that they are made aware of the discussion that took place at the town hall, the concerns that were brought forward by residents, and is actually embedded within the terms of reference for this committee. So not only is it integral for the town hall to happen, but then it is the next piece to make sure that the information that was shared and the concerns that were brought forward are passed along to the Executive Standing Committee. So the report here is a kind of a high level overview of who was there, the topics that were discussed, and then as an attachment to the report are the minutes from the meeting, so that the Executive Standing Committee has that for their review. And yeah, I'm happy to take any questions on the contents of the report itself.
Okay, before that, Annie, do you make this motion, or is that something the chair does?
That would be a member of the committee.
Okay, I need somebody to make this motion that the Accessibility Advisory Committee approve this report and forward it to the Standing Committee as an information item. Could I have somebody make that motion?
I can do that. Councillor Russell?
Thank you, Councillor Russell, and I need a seconder for that, please.
This is Liz. I'll second that.
Thank you, Liz. All in favor, please say aye or raise your hand virtually.
Aye.
I,
Any opposed? Motion carried. Excellent.
Chair, if I may, sorry, this is the committee clerk here. I just wanted to ensure that there's an opportunity for members of the committee to ask any questions or provide any feedback on the report as well. Just as this piece is the specific bridge between the Accessibility Advisory Committee, Town Hall, and Executive Standing Committee.
That is my next item. I just wanted to be sure that the motion was passed before. I'm just going in order of my agenda here. So, okay, so questions would be from Nicole first. Do you have the floor?
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay, Jackie,
no, Mr. Chair, I have nothing to add or question.
Rochelle,
No questions today. Thank you.
Councillor Russell,
Good, thank you.
Councillor Gammon.
All good, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Elizabeth,
Nope, I'm good.
okay, excellent. Oh, okay, I see what you're saying now, Liz, or Annie, thank you. I just wanted to be sure that that was done. Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah. Okay. The previous on that one. Correspondence, do we have any correspondence? Clerk?
Thank you, Chair. There is no correspondence received for this meeting.
Petitions or delegation?
Thank you, Chair. And the clerk's office did not receive any notification of petitions for this meeting.
Okay, we have no information items, so we are at reports. The Spring Garden Road Transit Pilot presentation. So we have Laura going to speak to us on the transit pilot presentation. So Laura Wilkinson, if you would like to take the floor, it is yours.
Perfect. I'm just going to share my screen here quickly, and I won't be able to see you guys. So I think the easiest way would be I'll go through my presentation, and then we can ask any questions or discuss anything afterwards. Is Is my screen showing?
No, it is not.
No? Okay. Let's try this. Share screen, window, share.
We can see your screen, but it's not.
See that now?
There we go. Yes. And it's in presentation mode.
Perfect. All right. So thank you all for inviting me here today to present. I know a lot of the questions you folks have are around the transit only pilot that's coming this June and was resulting of a motion of council a few months ago. But before I touch on that piece, I wanted to also take you back a little bit through the process and the work that's been done over the last few years related to the construction of the street, because that has a lot to do with, I think, some of your questions around the pilot and how that'll work. So I'm going to take us back, and then we can jump into some of the pilot stuff in a moment. So back in 2019, after a lot of work, which I will touch on, part of council's direction before we moved into the construction phase was proceeding with the design and construction of a streetscaping improvement based on option 4, which is something that was the result of a lot of public engagement and work over 2018 to 2019. And that kind of what we call a functional plan talks about the trade-offs of the street, and that's what we went to council with back in 2019. And those trade-offs looked at things like loading, sidewalk widths, parking, that sort of things. And so the functional plan had a lot to do with those kind of big major trade-offs. And the key trade-off for this project, like I said, was kind of the loading and parking that happened in the morning along Spring Garden Road, and not, I won't say conflict, but against the need for wider sidewalks along the street. So at the functional design stage, after multiple public engagements, what we brought forward to council was a functional plan that widened the sidewalk and removed all of the loading, parking, stopping along the Spring Garden Road corridor between Queen Street and South Park Street. What we did leave at that time, though, was one loading bay, kind of in front of McDonald's, close to South Park Street, as well as the Accessibus stop, which is in front of Park Lane. So those were both designed to have loading spaces along the corridor, even with the wider sidewalks. At that time, we looked at changing both Dresden Row and Birmingham Street to become one-way streets, which allowed us to increase the amount of parking and loading spaces on that side street, recognizing that this change or this trade-off around the parking and loading spaces along the corridor was happening. And by having it one direction, we can now use both sides of the curbs and have people move safely through the corridor. At that same time, and I'm actually going to pop back to my other graphic here, when we did that and we made loading and parking spaces on both sides of Dresden Row, Birmingham Street with that one-way change, we also recognized that the loading and stopping along the corridor and that removal had an impact from an accessibility stance. And so to try to mitigate this new no stopping, we added accessible parking spaces at every intersection to not only increase the number of accessible spaces in the overall area, but also to improve the reliability of where they would be and try to simplify and make them easy.
Laura has just gone quiet and
Yes,
is frozen.
I was going to mention that, so
Okay.
thank you, Councillor Russell, for that. I don't know if that's on our end or on hers or.
supported. And we also held
Laura.
a variety of public meetings throughout. Yeah.
Hi, Laura. Sorry, we lost the presentation. This is Annie from the clerk's office. So I'm actually going to ask my colleague Jill to put the presentation up on their screen, hoping that will help out the sound issue that we were having.
Hello.
Hi, Laura. This is Annie, the committee clerk here, where I'm just getting my colleague Jill to put the presentation up on their end. Now, Laura, can you see the presentation on your end now? Chair, maybe what we could do is I can try to get in touch with Laura offline, and perhaps we could move to the next agenda item, and I'll work with Laura to see if we can get that fixed.
Okay,
Okay.
so the next would be the Water Street functional plan presentation. So shall we try that one? That would be Lane and Hannah. Are you both here and able to present?
I am here. My colleague Hannah will not be attending today, but I'll be presenting on the project.
All right, well, you now have the floor.
All right.
And
I'm
will there
trying-
be PowerPoint for this? Liz is asking.
Yes, it'll be a PowerPoint. I'm not able to share my screen. It shows me as an attendee.
Thank you,
Now
Lean.
her audio is gone.
Thank you, Lean. You should have the ability to do that now.
Okay, awesome, thank you. All right, do you see my screen okay?
Yes, we do.
All right, great. So good afternoon. My name is Lean Romane. I'm a transportation planner with the Transportation Planning Group, and I'm the project manager for the Water Street Functional Plan. And I'm here today to share some of the work that we've been doing as part of this project. As part of today's presentation, I'm going to walk you through the project background, give an overview of the existing conditions, share some of the proposed functional design options that we've been working on, and I'll also share some of the project timelines. First off, the study area for this project is Lower and Upper Water Street from Terminal Road to historic properties, where we would tie into the Cogswell redevelopment project. The primary objective of this project is to provide a corridor-wide vision for Water Street based on its current and future needs, and as directed by relevant policies like the Integrated Mobility Plan and Transit Moving Forward Together Plan, among many others. This project will help us identify potential design options for the corridor that attempt to improve the quality of transportation infrastructure for all users. The design options will attempt to address gaps in the active transportation and transit networks. This project will also help us understand the potential implications of the different design options on the street functionality, so things like curbside access, and it will also help us identify impacts to the right-of-way, private properties, and utilities. Water Street is a one-way northbound corridor that carries over 5,000 vehicles per day and up to 5,000 pedestrians per day during a busy tourist season. The majority of Water Street has sidewalks on both sides of the street, with widths that are typically acceptable, with the exception of a couple of pinch points that I'll speak about in the next slide. The majority of the corridor also has on-street parking and loading on the west side of the street. There's also a unidirectional northbound tactically protected bikeway on Water Street as well. You can see that in the image to the left. This bikeway was implemented on Water Street in 2020 as part of the COVID-19 mobility response effort. The image on the far right shows the newest section of Water Street, which was implemented with the Queen's Mark development. There are two locations along the corridor where the sidewalks are narrow or disconnected. The first one is at Water Street, just before Prince Street. That's the image on the left. The sidewalk here is pretty narrow, and it's also obstructed by a street light pole that decreases the width of clear sidewalk space to less than 1 meter wide, making the sidewalk inaccessible. And then the second pinch point along Water Street is located opposite of historic properties, where the sidewalk is narrow and is disconnected as we move closer to the Cogswell interchange. The pedestrian realm currently contains a wide variety of surface materials and treatments in various states of repair. Many of those features have deteriorated over time, and the inconsistency in materials has also resulted in maintenance issues. After the project team completed a detailed review of existing conditions, we identified a need for key improvements along Water Street that will enhance how people use the corridor to move within and through the area. We are using a complete streets approach to redesigning the street. So we are considering how the street functions as a destination or a place, as well as a mobility link. Using this approach, and based on the policy direction, we established some design objectives. These are outlined on the slide, but I'll also go through them. So design objectives include enhancing the pedestrian realm by improving the connectivity, functionality, and the quality of the pedestrian infrastructure, recognizing Water Street's historical character and importance from the perspective of being a hub for tourism and civic events. We're also looking at opportunities to improve the street's aesthetics through streetscaping improvements, so things like adding trees and benches. We are also looking at developing an all ages and abilities bicycle facility that provides dedicated space for cyclists and includes features that improve safety, comfort, and convenience. We're also looking at implementing transit priority measures that allow buses to operate more efficiently, particularly during peak traffic periods. This would be in line with the corridor's designation as a transit priority corridor in the integrated mobility plan. We're also looking at continuing to accommodate the movement of vehicular traffic, including heavy and oversized loads. Based on our design objectives and based on a review of the physical constraints and opportunities along the corridor, we developed two different functional design options, and I'll go over those two options in the next couple of slides. The two functional design options that we've developed are the transit-focused option, which prioritizes transit improvements along the corridor. And then the second option is the pedestrian-enhanced option, which prioritizes improvements to the pedestrian realm. I will share the cross sections for the two different options for the majority of the corridor, with the exception of the segment between George Street and Duke Street, where the Water Street transit terminal is located. For that segment, we have developed multiple design options for that area, and those options will be available online for the public to review. But just to keep the presentation simple, I will skip talking about it today. And before I get into the cross sections, I did want to touch on the two pinch points that I mentioned previously. So the one at Prince Street and the one at historic properties. I don't have a cross section to show for these locations, and that's because there's really only one possible design solution, and that's to widen the sidewalks where they are narrow and inaccessible, and removing any obstructions that may impact pedestrian movement. These changes are going to be part of our proposed design solution. Starting with a transit-focused option, again, this option prioritizes improvements to transit along the corridor through transit priority measures like bus lanes. This slide shows the typical cross-section for the transit-focused option, as well as some of the advantages and drawbacks. This option would provide a 2-lane cross-section that includes a peak period bus lane on the east side of the street, so that's the waterfront side. This lane would accommodate parking and loading during the off-peak periods when the bus lane is not operational. The lane on the west side of the street would be a mixed traffic lane. For the off-street elements on the east side, for the off-street elements on the east side of the street, this option would include a street buffer separating the bicycle lane from the street. It would also include a raised unidirectional bicycle lane, so that's similar to what's currently in front of the Queen's Mark. This option would also accommodate a sidewalk buffer that provides opportunities to add streetscaping elements, so again, things like trees and benches. And it would also include a sidewalk. On the west side of the street, this option would also include, would retain the sidewalk and would also include a buffer separating the sidewalk from the street. One key thing to note with the options that I'll show today is that the curb on the west side of the street will mostly remain where it is today.
Sorry, I just wanted to interrupt for a second. This is Liz. Where is Queen's Mark?
Queen's Mark is the segment between it's right at George Street, so it's between Prince and George Street. It's opposite of the Halifax Ferry Terminal, so it's the new development on the waterfront.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yep, no worries. Right, this option would achieve our transit priority objective by adding a peak period bus lane. However, some of the disadvantages associated with this option include the loss of curbside access on the west side of the street where it's located today. This option would also mean that curbside access on the east side of the street will be available during the off-peak periods only when the bus lane is not operational. This option also does not increase the sidewalk width on the east side of the street, and it also removes our ability to add curb extensions or bump outs at intersections with Water Street. This cross-section will be applied to the entire length of the corridor, with the exception again of the pinch points that I've talked about, and with the exception of the segment between George Street and Duke Street, where again the Water Street Transit Terminal is located. And just as a reminder, this cross-section is currently applied in front of the Queen's Mark development. So this option would essentially copy what's there today and applies it to the rest of the corridor. Next is the pedestrian enhanced option, which prioritizes improvements to the pedestrian realm. This slide shows the cross-section that will be applied along the majority of the corridor. This cross-section retains a single travel lane, and it includes curbside access on one side of the street. With this option, we can strategically allocate curbside access on either the west side of the street or the east side of the street, depending on where parking and loading demand is high. So for example, we could provide curbside access on the west side in front of the Keith's Brewery on one section, but then provide it on the east side in front of the Maritime Museum, so that we can accommodate the tour bus's activity. This option would significantly increase the amount of off-street space on the east side of the street by narrowing the street and reallocating street space to the pedestrian and the cyclist realm. This option places a high priority on enhancing the pedestrian realm and making meaningful streetscaping improvements, recognizing the important role that Water Street plays in downtown Halifax as a pedestrian street. This option would accommodate a sidewalk buffer on the east side of the street that is wider than the buffer presented in the transit-focused option. The wider buffer would provide more separation between the sidewalk and the bicycle lane, reducing the likelihood of pedestrians encroaching on the bicycle lane. This option would also include curb extensions or bump outs along the majority of the intersections along Water Street. One major drawback of this option, though, is that transit priority cannot be accommodated. Sorry, I'm just going to move my cat from here. Right, so one major drawback of this option is that transit priority cannot be accommodated. This will have an impact on transit travel time and reliability. As part of the Moving Forward Together plan, Transit is expecting to run express buses along Water Street during the PM peak period. These changes would increase the amount of buses that will run on Water Street from 10 buses during the PM peak period today to about 37 buses in the future. In this option, we would maintain the existing cross section in front of the Queen's Mark, so the segment between Prince Street and George Street, and we would apply the pedestrian enhanced cross section to the rest of the corridor. One of the main challenges that our project team has been facing is trying to prioritize everything on Water Street and balance the needs of all the different users. What we realized through this project is that we really can only choose 2 of the 3 categories to prioritize along the corridor, and that not everything can be a priority on Water Street. We can either get transit priority, make some improvements to the pedestrian realm, but we'd lose curbside access where it's needed. Or we can get curbside access where it's needed, make meaningful improvements to the pedestrian realm, but we would lose transit priority along the majority of the corridor. So these are just some of the trade-offs that we're seeking feedback on from the public and our different project stakeholders, including yourselves. And I just wanted to touch on some additional changes that we're proposing to make to the west side of the street. So today, the west side of the street includes a sidewalk that is buffered with boxed and raised planters that have trees. These raised planters have decreased the amount of clear space that is available to pedestrians, making the sidewalk look narrower than it really is. And as part of this project, we're proposing to remove all the raised planters on the west side of the street and replace all the trees with trees in soil cells. These changes would increase the amount of clear space that is available to pedestrians, making it more comfortable to walk or roll on that side of the street. Streetscaping is an important component of our project. Streetscaping impacts the experience of pedestrians and other street users and has the power to animate and support a street's function as a destination and as part of the public realm through elements like trees, lighting, street furniture, and public art. And given Water Street's historical character, and again, its importance from the perspective of tourism and civic events, aesthetic appeal is particularly important. And as part of this project, we will be coming up with design guidelines for the future reinstatement of the pedestrian realm. And these guidelines will recommend things like surface treatments, plant palettes, furniture selection, and it will also identify enhanced public spaces along the corridor. And I'll go over some of the proposed streetscaping elements over the next couple of slides. So there may be opportunities to expand the public space more extensively in selected locations along Water Street. These public spaces could serve a variety of uses, including enhancing people's experiences, providing locations for public art installation, providing public seating, and small performing areas to host events, like the Halifax Busker Festival. We've identified these locations as enhanced public spaces in the project. One of those potential enhanced public spaces is located at the corner of Water Street and Salter Street. The images on the slide show the existing large planter that's currently in that location. This planter has caused some accessibility concerns as the sidewalk is located behind the planter and there is no sidewalk along the street. And as part of this project, we are proposing the removal of this planter, and instead we are looking at opportunities to create a public space like a mini plaza or a gathering node, recognizing that this node acts as a gateway to the waterfront from Spring Garden Road. This is just one example of a proposed enhanced public space along the corridor. We will be seeking feedback from the public and stakeholders on how they use these spaces or on how they think that these spaces should be used, and some feedback on what elements make a successful public space. Is it benches, trees, is it public art, or is it just creating a flexible space that can be used for a variety of uses? From a streetscaping perspective, we're looking at developing a furniture palette for the east side and the west side of the street. The images shown on the slide are just examples of the materials that could be used on the west side of the street. Right now, we're considering applying the downtown treatment to the west side. This is implemented today in front of the Alexander building on Water Street. So that's right by Bishop Street. For the east side of the street, we're considering various surface treatments, including the surface materials applied in front of the Queen's Mark development. We are also considering various seating options for individual seating or group seating. We're also mostly looking at wooden furniture because it allows us to treat the east side of the street as an extension to the waterfront. This slide shows some additional seating options, including potential seating with lights to help activate the space at night, considering that there are a lot of restaurants and cafes in the area. And increased lighting could help activate the space further. One additional improvement to the east side of the street for both the transit-focused option and the pedestrian-enhanced option is the increase in the number of trees. There are opportunities through this project to add trees along the east side of the street, where there are currently only a few trees in our right-of-way. And in terms of where we're at with the project, we've completed the existing conditions review. We've developed conceptual design options. We've also completed the first round of stakeholder engagement, which focused on the loading demand of the businesses in the area. And we've also developed functional design options, which I've shared with you today. And we're now in the public and stakeholder engagement phase of the project. We have not started public engagement yet. We're hoping to do that by the end of this week or early next week. Once this phase is complete, we will finalize the design options and finally provide a recommendation to Regional Council in late spring of this year. This concludes my presentation, and I welcome any questions you might have.
Mr. Chair, may I have a question?
Yes, I'm going to be running through questions momentarily for this.
Oh, right, you're going through the list. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
I do, no problem. Rochelle, do you have any questions for Lean?
I do. I have a couple that I have written down. One is a suggestion, not a question, but I'll start with the questions. So I guess in terms of like what kind of feedback that you're specifically looking for, or what kind of questions you're hoping to be asked, most of my questions are around like how is accessible parking going to be affected, or if there is sort of any plan for accessible parking sort of around this. And I think you were speaking to the term like curbside access, and I assume that means curbside access like from the street, and maybe you said it before and I just missed it or was confused. So I do want to clarify what curbside access means before I ask the rest of my questions.
Mr. Chair, through you, I'll just clarify that I actually got disconnected and I only heard the last question about the curbside access definition. So I'm sorry to ask if you could repeat your questions again.
That's okay. And actually my first question was just, can you clarify what curbside access means? My assumption is that it means curbside access like from the street, like buses and stuff like that, but I wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I apologize for that. So curbside access is on-street parking and loading.
Oh, okay, so like all curbside access, I guess. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I guess in sort of either of the options that you proposed, the pedestrian focused or the pedestrian enhanced or the transit focused, it sounds like one of them includes options for accessible parking and the other doesn't, and it would be sort of pedestrian only and like sort of through traffic. Can you just clarify sort of which plans do include plans for accessible parking and different accessibility sort of things like that?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I would say that things like accessible parking would be looked into further or reviewed further as part of the preliminary design phase of the project when we engage with parking services. But both options would include the ability to include accessible parking on the street. The difference, though, is that the transit-focused option would restrict parking on the east side during the peak periods when the bus lane is operational, which means that accessible parking would not be provided during the peak periods.
Right.
And the pedestrian enhanced option has the ability to provide the accessible parking.
Okay, great, thank you. And then the other question was, Oh, it wasn't really a question. I guess it was more, and I don't know if you're looking for this feedback yet, but you were sort of talking about how to use those larger sort of sidewalk sections when you remove those large planters that are creating sort of access issues. And I was wondering if there had been thought, or if this is a place where I can suggest some 24-hour public use washrooms, both as like, you know, I think that would speak to an access need that a lot of people have. That doesn't really exist in Halifax right now. And so, especially near the waterfront where there's a lot of sort of things happening pretty regularly and not a lot of access to public use washrooms, that might be a space to throw them in. Yeah, that is all that I have right now. And I'm sure that other folks on the committee have lots of other questions and things to ask. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Rochelle. Councillor Russell.
Thank you very much. I did lose concentration for a couple of minutes in the presentation, so the answers to my questions might have been presented, and I apologize if I missed them. I mean, you were talking about looking at the transit priority option. You were talking about delivery only on the water side of Lower Water Street, and I'm wondering how places like Keith Hall and the other places that are on the non-water side would be able to get their goods. Would it travel across? Would people simply carry it across the street? Secondly, just want to confirm that the bike lane is unidirectional and heading north. And the final one is, if transit was lost, if you go with the pedestrian preference option, and transit was lost on Lower Water Street, where would it go?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor. For the first question about losing curbside access on the west side of the street. So the transit-focused option, you're right, curbside access would only be provided on the east side of the street, so by the waterfront side, which means that we would not be able to provide curbside access on the west side of the street without any additional trade-offs to the pedestrian realm. So for example, we looked at an option that would give us curbside access on both sides of the street, but that option resulted in a reduction in the sidewalk width and a reduction in an elimination as well of the buffer between the sidewalk and the bike lane. So there were a lot of trade-offs associated with that option. Where can they do loading? It would be either from the east side of the street or from some of the side streets. If we end up going with this option, then we will likely be completing a loading demand strategy just to get an understanding of what impacts this would have, and just to help businesses understand where they could do that loading activity on the street. For the bike lane question, yes, the bike lane will be unidirectional and northbound. And then the third question about if transit is lost on Water Street, what would happen? So if, based on the work that we've done so far, both options would not preclude us from operating transit on Water Street. It's just that the pedestrian enhanced option would have impacts on the reliability of transit. So transit may choose that if the reliability is that bad, that maybe there should be some transit network changes that maybe would move the express buses from Water Street. It's still an early conversation. That's still not something that we've considered yet, or we haven't thought about further yet. We have connected with our colleagues at Transit, and that's something that we are trying to understand a bit more.
Okay. If you're looking for an opinion based on what we've heard today, then my opinion would be in favor of the pedestrian realm. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gammon, Gammon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, Rochelle asked the question that I was that I had on my mind, so I was really happy for that. Thank you, Rochelle. Oh, how do I put this? in terms of like the progress that this project has taken and where you're going to go, I'm just wondering if there's places in there where you could accommodate some of the accessibility language. It is, you know, about it's either a bus or it's a person, right? So I'm just wondering about accommodating in the presentation, how do we say this will enhance accessibility? Do you know what I mean? Like, so how do we give language to that? And I think that when a couple of those slides that you presented that on the pedestrian side, there were some really good places there that we could add some language in there too about this actually enhances accessibility. I'm wondering about, and I know that there's a standard for the bike lanes, right? But even in the images, a bike lane, can we use a wheelchair? Like, where can we be inclusive even in our imaging? Thanks.
Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor. This is some really good feedback, and I can definitely start incorporating some accessibility language in the slides and the presentation that we use. And that it also includes adding things like, you know, wheelchairs in the images that we're looking at as well.
Thank you, Lena. I remember being in San Francisco with a friend of mine who uses a wheelchair, and he had some really interesting experiences using his wheelchair in a bike lane. And so every time now I see that bike image, I think of my friend David. So thanks.
I will only add, been there, done that. Okay, Liz, do you have any questions?
I'm just having a little bit of a hard time seeing, sorry.
Okay.
So my thing would be, as an older person and being able to access the waterfront. I guess my concern would be access for wheelchairs, not me specifically, you know, but people end up, as they age, sometimes end up in wheelchairs, but I would like to be able to go down to the waterfront as well. And then sometimes I'm not able to do that because things are too far away, or whatever the case may be. The harbor is too far. So I usually am just sort of around the street area. I generally am able to only park my car and go around where I'm able to move around my car. I haven't sort of wandered around in any other areas because I didn't feel like it was safe to do so. I'm not sure how people feel who are busing in that area. My experience has been with the car. In relationship to the bathrooms. I'm wondering what those will look like. Would it be like royal flushes, like the porta potties, or would that be like an actual bathroom that's established there? I was just curious if you were to have that, what that would specifically look like as well. Because nobody wants to use a porta potty or have royal flushes or anything like that set up. It would be nicer to have like a permanent bathroom established, and maybe more than one in that area or throughout the city. As nobody wants to walk into a restaurant and ask them if they can use their bathroom because there isn't anything really down in that area.
Mr. Chair, I can answer what I was hoping for when I brought up the bathrooms.
Yes, I was just curious if I have any ideas, not now, but after, are we able to contact you with those ideas as well?
Mr. Chair, through you, so I can try to answer some of these questions. So to answer the last question, absolutely feel free to contact me after this presentation with any feedback. That's completely fine, and you're more than welcome to do so. We've just entered the public engagement and stakeholder phase, so there's a lot of opportunities to provide feedback. In relation to the washrooms, At this stage, I would say that this is something that we'll look into further. That's something that our project team could consider. In terms of what it would look like, I'm not sure. I know that Rochelle said that she has some ideas, and I'll welcome hearing them as well. And the third part about the access to the waterfront. So I was just wondering if you could clarify that further. So is it access from the waterfront from the curbside that you're finding a bit difficult, or is it just the fact that there are not enough points along the street to cross to the waterfront?
I'm just really comparing to older people in comparison to the younger individuals. Not specifically for myself, but maybe even just other people that I have seen sort of moving around downtown. When older people are sort of out and about, they may just go for a drive even and not even park and get out and move around the waterfront. They may want to, but they may not have, maybe they have a wheelchair and they don't have access to moving around the waterfront because of the inaccessibility. So maybe that would even be something that you could rent. I don't know if that would be a part of something like this. If you had something you could rent, I don't know what that would even look like, whether it be a scooter or wheelchairs or something, so that if people arrived downtown and they wanted to scoot around and it was challenging to move around in that area, if they could use a wheelchair to do that, if we were to rent a wheelchair so people could do that. I don't know what people's thoughts are.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. I can't say that we've thought of that before. It's an interesting idea, and I'm not sure. Sorry, there's a cat here. Right, so it's an interesting idea, and I don't think that that's something that we've seen happen here yet, unless I'm wrong. But yeah, that's something that we could potentially look at as well.
Lean, can I just say something quickly too, related to that?
Yeah.
All of you, just for frame of reference, I'm the acting principal planner for the streetscaping team. So work very closely with Lean, and I just wanted to add that while this project is looking at the right of way, we do work really closely with our colleagues in Develop Nova Scotia who own the property along the harbor and the waterfront and kind of the larger park spaces in a lot of situations. So a lot of this feedback, I think, is something that we can pass along to our partners there. Obviously, in a right of way, we're really restricted. So just thinking about some of the comments around bathrooms as well. Right of ways are really tight spaces, but Develop Nova Scotia is super keen at looking at these kinds of things. So I just wanted to say that this is something that we can pass along to our partners in this area as well. And we'll be consulting with them very closely through this project. Sorry to interrupt.
I don't know if I can add one more thing before we move along.
Sure.
And now speaking not as an older individual, but as a deaf individual. It's also really important to have signs that are really clearly stated and posted, whether it be directional signs or signs talking about restaurants or sitting spots or things like that. And I don't know if there could be a map set up somewhere where people could actually access the map. Like you've seen some areas, you can go to an area and there's a map there and you're able to follow that, see where you are and see what's where and that sort of thing. Whether there's something like that and maybe how far something is, that kind of idea as well. That may be helpful for individuals having the map in place, but also having good signage so that people know where they're going, so they don't have to maybe stop and try to communicate with somebody else to ask for directions and that sort of thing. And that's everything that I have. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, through you, yeah, that's something that we could consider as part of this as well.
Okay, are you satisfied with these answers, Liz?
I am, thank you.
All right. Nicole, do you have any questions?
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
And Jackie, do you have any questions?
Mr. Chair, I do, please. Lean, first of all, thank you very, very much. That was a very extensive presentation and I think well put together, helped me understand a whole lot. My question is general. A few years back when I started to see the shared lanes, I thought it was a wonderful idea. I'm seeing in your presentation the shared lanes with a buffer. Can you help me understand if that's just maybe a progress in design that's safer, or if there's a particular reason why with some shared ways there would be a buffer and others not? Thank you.
Yeah, I can try to answer that. So, and maybe this is a miscommunication on my part, but we're not, there are shared lanes as in from the perspective of the bike lane. Yeah, so we try to provide a buffer between the bike lane and the street and a buffer between the bike lane and the sidewalk whenever it's possible. We're always restricted by the amount of space that we have in the right of way. So if we don't have space, the buffer gets constrained.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Are you satisfied, Jackie, with that? Annie, since 9.1 was abbreviated, should we return to that now?
Hi, Chair. Yes, if everybody's good on their questions for this item, certainly. That scratching is my cat, so
Okay.
here with you, Lee.
Yeah. So let's go back to the Spring Garden Road Transit. If we should try this
Perfect.
again, here we go.
I'd like, this is Liz. Sorry, I'd like to see those cats. This is Liz.
I don't know if Lean's still there. It looks like her camera's off.
All right. Thank you, Lean, for the presentation.
Unfortunately, I don't have any cats to show. I have changed locations at work, so I am hopeful now that my computer is going to work a little bit better. I'm no longer on Wi-Fi, so we should be able to get through this without any issues.
I think your cats might be shy, Liz is saying.
Okay, I am going to share my screen.
Excellent.
Are you able to see my slides again?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I'm not entirely sure where I dropped off for you folks, but I think this is a good spot to kind of regroup. Just a quick recap. So in 2018 actually is when we started the engagement for this project. In 2019 is when we came to council with recommendations on the functional plan. And the functional plan was really focused on kind of those big trade-offs. And because Spring Garden Road is a street that serves so many functions, we wanted to make sure that we went to council at that point to get input on those trade-offs and how to move forward. So the slide I've got here just kind of walks us from the initial engagement, which started back in summer 2018, all the way through to construction that just happened this summer. And I wanted to just highlight two check-ins we had as well with the Accessibility Advisory Committee. One in February 2019 before we went to council the first time with the functional design to get some input on those trade-offs, and then again at the schematic design phase, which is what we kind of call the concept before moving into detailed design. So we came back to the Accessibility Advisory Committee in February 2020 as well. Before I jump into some of that, so again, maybe I'll just move back to my other image here where I cut off. So we have the functional design was really focused on kind of that trade-off in spaces between the loading and parking space that was permitted until 11 a.m. on Spring Garden Road, but as we all know, happened illegally 24 hours. As we made that change to remove the parking and loading from Spring Garden Road, we kept both one loading bay around the McDonald's close to South Park, and then we also kept the Accessibus space in front of Park Lane Mall. All other stopping activities were moved to the side streets. So this was done in conjunction with making Dresden Row one-way northbound and Birmingham Street one-way southbound, which allowed us to use both sides of the street for parking and loading, increasing the amount of parking and loading in the entire area. And also in doing that, it allowed us to add an accessible space at every single intersection, which allowed for not only an increase in accessible parking in the area, but that reliability of where to find spaces, and also put the accessible parking space as close as we could to all the destinations on Spring Garden Road. So that's kind of our functional design standpoint. And then we went to council with that layout and council approved that to move forward to the concept design and detail design. At that point, we brought in someone to do an accessibility audit. They used a variety of best practice standards, so the Canadian Standards Association of the Built Environment Standards, Canadian National Institute for the Blind, CNIB's Clearing Our Path guidelines, and the Universal Design Best Practices as outlined by the Rick Hansen Foundation for Built Environment Standards. So at this point, we wanted to have someone kind of look through the design as we had it and give some feedback so that we could consider it in the detailed design phase. So this included things like the accessible parking spaces, the pavement and sidewalk treatments, the street furniture, and the lighting. And what I've got on my slide here is just a chart outlining some of the examples for feedback we received on the accessible parking applied to the street. So again, just one example here. This is the rendering that was done at the functional design stage. And one of the things the consultant noted was that kick space was required under benches to allow for easy maneuverability, allowing people to stand and sit with more ease. And so that's something that you'll notice was especially designed in the new benches as you see them on the street today. Another just example, some comments on the tonal contrast and how that worked between the planters and the sidewalk. So that was also something that we considered in the design. So now getting to the transit only. Our direction from council is to begin transit only pilot implementation in June 2021. It will be in place for a full calendar year, which will allow us to understand how the street's functioning and also how it functions in different seasons. However, council did ask for us to come back at a 6-month check-in, so that'll be just before the holidays in December, likely. And the transit-only timeline is it'll be in place from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. every single day, so that includes weekends as well. And the point of this was to pick a time where the reliability of transit was extremely important, and it reflects the nature of the street from both a traffic and transit perspective, but also allows general vehicle use of the street at the time when transit and traffic vehicle volumes are also lower. So trying to find that balance. I also just wanted to mention that when we begin rolling out this transit-only pilot, we've been working really closely with our colleagues in communications to build a communications plan to inform people of these changes, not only residents in the immediate area, but also residents. Obviously, Spring Garden Road is a very important street to everyone in the municipality, and trying to get the word out. And all of this will be, of course, in complement with the regulatory signage and enforcement efforts that will be kind of rolling out with that as well. Also important with any pilot is what is the metrics.
Hi, sorry, this is Liz. Actually, I have a comment.
Sure.
So I'm just thinking that the buses, sorry, I just don't think that, oh, sorry, maybe I interrupted. Should I be speaking now or should I not be speaking?
It's okay. I had mentioned earlier that we would wait till the end.
Okay.
Completely fine.
Okay, I was just wondering about the cars not being allowed to be on Spring Garden Road, if I'm understanding that correctly. That would be concerning for me. I know a lot of people use their cars on Spring Garden Road. So how would people then access things if there wasn't any sort of thoroughfare, if they had appointments in that area on Spring Garden Road? I'm not sure what that would look like. So, yeah, and particularly older people as well.
Yeah, so I touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but if you can't, sorry?
I'm wondering, about the mall and accessing Park Lane and things like that as well. So, and if they're not able to access it, then maybe they would just go somewhere else where they would find access easier instead of going down to Spring Garden Road. We don't want to lose that business for people on Spring Garden Road if we're not having cars able to access that. So not everyone is able to use the bus. Sorry, go ahead.
Nope, that's great. And I think that is you've outlined the risk and the concern around the transit only pilot. And that's the big reason of why this is a pilot and not something that we're just rolling out permanently. So based on our research in other areas, we think this will be something that's effective. However, to your point, there are trade-offs in circulation in the area. Is still possible, but it is different. So part of that change to the one-way streets is to help people move around the area a little bit more easily with less congestion in traffic. And so if you were coming down Spring Garden Road, while you wouldn't be able to drive right down the street, you would be able to come down a side street, go across the intersection to where you needed to go. And then, as you mentioned, I think one of the big concerns and what we've heard is a trade-off. Is that you will no longer be able to be dropped off right in front of a business, which is actually something that is in effect even now. Because we had to widen the sidewalks, you're no longer allowed to stop along Spring Garden Road to drop someone off, whether it's transit only or not. And that's a big part of why we wanted to make sure all the accessible parking spaces and that space was available right at the intersection so that we could get people as absolutely close as possible, recognizing that trade-off and that change in how the street now functions. So I hope that answers your question. We can talk, I'll just finish my last few slides and then we can talk a bit more about that because I'm sure others will have questions as well. So just one of my last points was around the measures of effectiveness, and this goes to your question kind of really well as well, is as we roll this out in June and over the year, my team will be collecting a lot of data, both, traffic volumes and transit and all of that kind of technical data, but we'll also be spending a lot of time with surveys and talking to people both on the street, to businesses, as well as surveys online for the larger area to get feedback from everyone in the neighborhood and the larger HRM to understand how this is working for people before we make the decision about whether or not we include it permanently. If we find that it's not working, even at the 6-month mark, this change is very easy to undo. It's just regulatory signage. And so there's kind of a no harm, no foul in switching it back to be a normal street. However, we think, as volumes increase, now that hopefully we're kind of starting to get out of our COVID restrictions and people hopefully come back to working downtown and all of that the risk now that cars are not able to stop or pull over that if anyone does, and with the amount of vehicles on it, that you'll see a lot of congestion along the street, which will start negatively impacting transit, but also anyone trying to get down the corridor, because there isn't that space for people to pull in and out anymore. This is my last slide here. I just wanted to pull up the diagram again that shows what will be what the corridor looks like now with the wider sidewalks and the single lane in each direction. And I can take any questions that you may have at this point.
Thank you for that, Laura. I would remind the committee, I'd like to remind the committee that questions should be asked after the presentation, just in case your question happens to be answered after you come up with it. So please wait till after all presentations to ask your questions. So with that, Jackie, you have the floor.
No, Mr. Chair, I'm fine. It's all very amazing to watch it happen. So thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Laura.
Okay, Michelle, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Andrew. I guess I do. The main question is, and also thank you for that presentation. So I guess the planning for this started like before the COVID-19 pandemic. And so I'm wondering sort of, and I know that you had said that there was sort of some like check-ins and continued planning done sort of throughout, but I do wonder like how much the needs have changed since sort of the originating of this idea. And if the way that COVID-19 has affected businesses and accessibility sort of more broadly has been taken into account sort of throughout this planning process, if things have been changed or looked at to say, maybe this isn't a good idea anymore. Just because I know a lot of businesses who are, have been suffering because of the spring garden closure that took place over the last several months. And now to say, well, we're going to restrict access to spring garden further, in a pandemic, which we are still very much in. Just because restrictions are being lifted does not mean the pandemic is over. So, and restrictions may have to come back depending on how well back goes. So I guess I'm just thinking of how does all of this, how has all of this been sort of taken into account through this planning process?
Yeah, so as you indicated, we were almost basically to construction when the pandemic started. Unfortunately, not right at construction phase, because it would have been a great time that first time everything locked down to build when no one was really around and we didn't have kind of the middle ground of restrictions that we had right now. And that was something the businesses had asked us a lot for was, can you build it now? Can you build it now? But we were pretty far in what we were doing from a construction standpoint. I think to your point around business sales and concerns, that's something that is very much top of mind. We've been working with the Spring Garden Business Association since 2018 extremely closely. They've been incredible partners to us in terms of working with their businesses, getting their feedback and being able to communicate that to us. When we first came to council, we were suggesting starting this transit-only pilot in January 2022. So having it already implemented, and one of the things we had heard from businesses was let us catch our breath, with COVID, construction, it's been a lot. We do have some concerns. So we pushed off the start of this pilot to give them a little bit of a breather and also more time to prepare for this transit pilot coming. Again, what we've seen from other cities is this sort of both a destination as well as these transit changes usually increase business in other cities. So what we're hoping to see is that at the very least, business kind of stays static, if not gets better. But again, that's part of what we're looking to hear from businesses. As I mentioned, also council put in that 6-month check mark. So that gives us another chance if we're finding that there's significant impacts that are not in line with what we were hoping to see, then we cancel the project, we move on. And as we start to roll this out in June, again, we'll be working really closely with the businesses and others in the area to understand how it is impacting people.
Sorry, this is Liz. I missed a little bit of the end of that. I couldn't see, but I'm back now. Can you just add the last sentence or two of what you were just referring to?
Yeah, we were just talking about the business's concern around a transit only and how this impacts people. And we'll be working really closely with the businesses over the summer in the transit pilot to understand how they're impacted. And if there are negative issues that are happening, it's something that we can just cancel the pilot and go back to normal. And that'll be the feedback that we're looking to get from this pilot and part of what success would mean.
Thank you. Last question for me. Oops, sorry.
Live right there on Spring Garden Road, actually. So I just see it every day where I live so close. So I see what's happening on Spring Garden Road so frequently. So, it would be good if it was happening at a later time. Certainly not right now with the no vehicles, but buses only. I think it'd be important for sure to give them businesses some time to get things going again. Things are back to normal. So that'd be really concerning for sure. I know that people are worried about the businesses on that street.
Great, thank you.
Rochelle, do you have any other questions?
Yeah, and my last question was just around the choice in the no vehicle access. I know, like you said, it was 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. and I was just wondering why those hours specifically. Yeah, as opposed to the sort of parking rules on Barrington Street that are from, I think it's 8 to 6 or whatever it is. Yeah, so I was just wondering sort of why and what was that thought process?
Definitely. So there was a couple factors. So the main one is that Spring Garden Road operates really differently than any other street in the municipality, where we see, streets like Barrington or Roby Street really have our AM and PM peaks, where you see commuters coming and going and traffic volumes are really high at those times. Based on the data we've collected over the last few years, Spring Garden Road doesn't operate like that. Spring Garden has its peak in the morning, but then there's another peak around lunchtime and noon, and then that kind of continues into the evening, and you only really see vehicle and volumes drop around 8 p.m. So we looked at that, and that data is kind of how we picked those times. The other thing that was a factor was trying to find something that was the easiest to communicate. So having it be, it starts at one time, ends at one time, it's every single day, becomes a little bit easier to communicate and for people to understand and grapple with, considering how busy, again, the street is. And people come for different reasons, different days, and all of that. We didn't want to, have people be really unsure of, is it there only in the morning or at night or all of that. So we tried to find a time that would meet the needs and reflect the data, but it was also something that was easy to communicate as much as something like this is.
Great, thank you. That answers my question.
Okay, thank you, Rochelle. Jackie, do you have any questions?
No, Mr. Chair, I'm fine. Thank you.
All right, Councillor Russell, you're up.
Thank you. This is something that we have been seeing the evolution of for a couple of years now. And I'm curious to see how this experiment plays out. But again, I'm looking forward to it. So thank you.
Okay, Councillor Gammon, do you have anything to add?
No questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Yes, thank you, Laura and Lean, for both of your presentations. They were very informative, and I'm quite excited to see what's coming for our fair city. Okay, staff updates. Do we have any staff updates, Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Chair. I have not received any notification that from staff for updates today, but if there's anybody on the line who has one, feel free to share it now.
I'm not hearing any, so I will take that as a no. So committee members, we have none. Is that still true? Any?
Yes, thank you, Chair. That is correct.
And added items, we have none.
And that is correct as well.
So the next meeting we have is March 21st, 2022. That's supposed to be a big date for us, but we shall see what happens with the other notes of that day shall be. So our next meeting is March 21st. And could I have a mover for a motion to adjourn?
So move, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. Thank you all very much. Meeting is